We bring in NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Secretary General, very good to have you with us. You have just been in the middle of these meetings. We've seen some
great
headlines.
To be on the program.
Thank you very much. We've seen some of these headlines coming out from leaders from Poland, basically saying that they understand that the situation is very different now. Europe absolutely must step up to the table in terms of expenditures. What is your take on these talks between the United States and Russia and Europe being excluded?
Well, this meeting was really very successful. What you see today, we had General Gallup, President Trump's special representative at NATO this morning with the ambassadors, and now we had this meeting here in Paris with many European leaders, and really Europe is now stepping up. Last week, I was a bit disappointed that Europeans were saying, hey, we also have to be at the table, and why are we not there? And they're now really starting to dialogue, to strategize how they can support the peace effort. And that is important because we know that post a peace deal, there will be the need to make that peace deal lasting, enduring. And that means we need security guarantees. So Europe can play a role there with a clear backup from the United States. So this was good. This was really a good day. We are moving forward here.
So what I'm hearing is that NATO is now okay with allowing the United States and Russia to have these negotiations. What about Ukraine?
Well, it's not saying that I am okay with that, because in the end it is, of course, the American administration engaging now in talks with Ukrainians and the Russians. It is my absolute understanding that Ukraine will be an integral part of those talks, which is only logical, because this is about Ukraine. Then there was the question of, hey, where are the Europeans? And what I said to the Europeans in Munich at this famous security conference the last couple of days was, stop complaining, start acting, get your act together. And tonight was an evening, a discussion to really get that done. And what I heard here is people are willing to step up to support a peace deal. Obviously, that means that we still have many details to hammer out because the whole peace process still has to start. But it is important that there is now more convergence on this, and I'm really positive.
Well, it's really interesting to see this push and shove apparently bringing European leaders together and understanding that they have to make a stronger defense commitment in their budgets. I think that's a huge development. Here's one of the statements from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, as you put it, from that very famous, at this point, Munich conference. Here's something really pivotal that he said. Let's watch.
That's why our message is so stark to our European allies. Now is the time to invest, because you can't make an assumption that America's presence will last forever.
Do you see this as a very large turning point for Europe and the post-World War II agreement that has seen the United States spending the most money in the entire equation against Russia? Is Europe now ready to take that burden of defense, 5% per country, as President Trump has asked for?
Well, clearly what the United States signaled in Munich, but also in a meeting of defense ministers with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth being there, what the US signaled is, hey, listen, Europeans, you've got to pay more. And by the way, this was the message President Trump consistently signaled between 2017 and 2020. And we have stepped up. By now we are spending $700 billion more on the European side of NATO than before President Trump came into office. It is absolutely still not enough. We have to do much, much more. But the good thing is now that we have a process in place by which we can exactly determine what the gaps are in terms of long-range missiles, in terms of our armies, in terms of our logistics, in terms of our military mobility, in terms of our air defense. And it will require a lot more money than we spent so far. We will come to the conclusions towards summer on this, but I can hear now from our European colleagues that they're willing to step up also when it comes now to Ukraine, helping with the peace deal, but also when it comes to spending more on defense, because it is fair. Not only because President Trump wants this, and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, but also because we have to defend ourselves. And going forward, we cannot if we do not spend more here in Europe, and the effect is that we will be more in balance with the US.
So I think that will be very welcome to the White House, to the administration, and, you know, the importance of stepping up to defend Europe especially against Russia. I want to ask you, though, what you think Putin, how he will interpret all of this, because there's a lot of reporting in the United States that this could be seen as giving Russia an advantage in these talks, that they would still be able to keep Crimea and Donbass, the regions that they took over the last 10 years.
Well, Martha, as you know, the talks have to start. I have great trust in the American team conducting those talks. Ukraine will be part of those talks, no doubt. Europe wants to have a place at the table. Well, I told them, fight yourself a way to the table by coming up with concrete proposals. That is now happening. But to your point, President Putin has to realize that at this moment, NATO is able to defend itself. If he would try to capture 1 square mile of Estonia or Poland or whatever territory in NATO, the reaction will be devastating. My problem is that in 3-5 years, given his huge defense spending, given his huge defense industrial base, that we would not be able anymore to defend ourselves. And that is why we have to spend more. But this is also why on Ukraine we have to get to a deal which is strong. China is watching, others are watching, but it has to be strong and lasting and enduring, so that we make sure that he will also, when it comes to Ukraine, never try again.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that President Trump believes that Europe has to defend Europe when it comes to Russia in particular, and that the United States has to turn its attention to China and to the larger threats that are out there in order to secure really all of Western civilization. Is NATO willing to take on the peacekeeping mission, including NATO boots on the ground, for Ukraine when this negotiation hopefully is settled and the war is over?
Well, one NATO is for over 50% US. And the other 31 NATO countries, the combined economy is a little bit under 50% compared to the US. So the US is by far the most important ally within NATO. But the US is absolutely right that it is only fair that on the European side of NATO, we ramp up spending because we need to do it for our own defense, but also because it is fair to get this balance with what the US is spending on defense. But that doesn't mean that the US is abandoning Europe. No, we have to work together to make sure that we keep the whole of NATO territory safe. But clearly we have to step up on this part. And when it comes to the other theaters, the other areas in the world where the US has to concentrate its attention on, obviously China, and of course the Middle East, it's only fair that they ask the Europeans to do more so that they can be able to make sure that they can have their attention concentrating on all these areas, including Europe. So I really understand that, but it doesn't mean that they are leaving Europe or whatever.
Well, it's fascinating that this discussion about Europe taking the reins appears to be galvanizing the countries of NATO to defend Europe, which is clearly what President Trump has pushed for and Secretary of Defense Hegseth is pushing for. Obviously, we'll see if they actually step up and that turns into that 5% commitment. I know you've said it could be north of 3%, and we'll see where those numbers end up. Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, is speaking out now about these meetings. He says it is clear the United States will not leave NATO, but Europeans will have to step up. Did you get that same assurance from General Kellogg and other American leaders, Pete Hegseth, President Trump, that the United States will not leave NATO?
Absolutely. There is a total commitment to NATO. Because what the Americans are telling me, NATO is also in their interest. The fact that the US, with 31 other allies, is working together makes it possible for the US to project its power, but it was on itself already very strong. But the projection of the power is much more effective when you do that with the 32, when it comes to Russia, but also, of course, when it comes to dealing with the situation in the Indo-Pacific. Not that NATO is active there, we are active in the Northern Atlantic region, but obviously we can support each other, we can dialogue with each other, we can make sure that we share those strategic interests. So there is a total commitment to NATO from everybody I speak with in the American administration, but also this clear understanding, this clear, let's say, expectation that indeed, as we discussed here in our talk now, that we ramp up spending here. And by the way, collectively, both the US and Europe, we have to produce more. We are not producing enough defense industrial products. We are lacking behind Russia really massively at the moment, and China, and that is a big problem.
With regard to this criticism that we hear here at home as well, that this deal is appeasement to Putin, do you agree with that? What's your reaction to that criticism that is in some corners?
I absolutely reject that. What the American president is doing, he wants to bring this war to an end. He has taken initiatives to do that. That whole process is now starting. The Europeans were a bit rattled when that started and started to complain that they were not involved. They are now stepping up. They're getting their act together, wanting to participate. Obviously, we will have many details to be hammered out, including if the US does not have boots on the ground, what will the security guarantees look like, the enablers look like, etc. So many things to be discussed, but in an optimistic atmosphere where Europe wants to speed up and wants to really get engaged. But I absolutely reject that criticism of President Trump's initiative. I think it's only right that he tries to end this war, and we need American leadership here.
So if there are no U.S. boots on the ground, can NATO, can Europe protect security for Ukraine without any U.S. boots on the ground?
Yes, but what the European countries are saying, and I think they are right here, from a strategic point of view, that it is crucial that there is a backup and sometimes enablers. And this is what and these are details. I mean, we can hammer this out. But it's clear that the US has said no boots on the ground. So that means that we have to work from that position and that we have to make sure that we still can do this. But it still means to have a credible deterrence and to make sure that Russia will never try this again, that there is at least a backup from the Americans. And that's what we are discussing now together with General Kellogg and the American administration. Again, General Kellogg being today at NATO headquarters and traveling onwards now to other European countries and Ukraine.
All right, we're going to have a lot more on that. We'll have full analysis of the news that was made in the interview and in Paris today. But I got to take you to another breaking news story right now.